This is, I think, for me, an inspiring panel. This is one where perhaps I knew absolutely least before I went on the journey of discovering Ukraine, Ukrainian identity, and the source of Ukrainian resistance. And I think it's an important journey because, you know, I have to make an admission here. I'm one of those people who studied Russian. I'm one of those people who started with Russian literature. And early on got a sense there was, you know, a strong imperial strain in it. That wasn't exactly lost. But it's only through rereading and trying to understand that sort of culture and that history in the light of the current invasion that you get an understanding of the depth of that imperial narrative. You get a sense of the toxicity of it as well. So this, for me, has been a huge learning journey. And I'm going to welcome up some people who I've spoken to on the channel, who you'll recognize, who have helped massively in that education effort, and some new faces here who are going to help me continue that learning journey. We've got Marta Trotsiuk, a Ukrainian art ambassador, Gallery 101 founder, expert in international art projects and cultural diplomacy. Thank you, Marta. And then we've got Oleksandr Pronkevych, is a professor of philology, director of the Institute of Philology of the Petro-Mikhailo Black Sea National University, and president of the Hispanic Society of Ukraine. Welcome. And another of my delightful guests on the channel is Maria Shuvalova, a doctoral candidate at the National University of Kiev-Mohyla Academy. She's also prominent in the media on topics of Ukrainian culture and Russian imperial cultural appropriation. And a new face I'm delighted to welcome to the panel is Sofia Cheliak, who comes extremely highly recommended from my friends at the Ukrainian Institute in London, including Alessia Kharemechuk, who very kindly put us in touch. Sofia is a program director of the Lviv Book Forum, which many of you will know, and is a TV host, cultural manager, translator from Czech into Ukrainian, and a PEN Ukraine member. Well, let's get straight into it, and I get a bit confused, so we're going to go right to left, and we'll keep it nice and simple for me. So I'm going to get a bit tired soon and confused probably. And the first question I think is a more personal one, and one we've talked a lot about geopolitics and so on, but the topic of like personal experience and trauma is not necessarily discussed as much as it should be. I want to know how the panel find the balance, the optimism, and the energy to just keep going with their work. Because I know many people here work day in, day out. Air raid sirens in the evening means that they don't necessarily have a good night's sleep, but people are doing everything to support Ukraine. And just how do you cope with that? What's your coping mechanism? Let's start, Marta. Is it on?
Yep. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting. Well, as for me, the activities, what I do is my coping mechanism, actually, and the results that I see also drives me to continue. And communication with people, the meaningful work, I think it's meaningful what I do with my colleagues and connecting Ukraine to international cultural community, art community, participating in spreading the word about uniqueness of Ukraine, fighting Russian cultural propaganda. I believe it's very important, and I see that me and my colleagues, we are putting all our efforts and we can see results. So the results, they're helping me to continue, actually encouraging to do more and more. And when you see them and you see that you help actually my country, Ukraine, not only to survive, but to fight back proper way, that's the best what keeps me going and gives me the energy to wake up, helps me to fight my anxiety and everything. I believe that's the results of the work and meaningful ideas behind that.
Oleksandr.
I want to pay your attention that now I am a chairperson of Philology of the Ukrainian Catholic University. I have been Dean of Philology at the Petro-Mogila Black Sea University for 25 years before the war. The war made me come here. And I have three quick thoughts to answer a question. First, I am a university professor. My profession is to teach students, and I cannot do it without thinking about future. This is professional, these are professional rules I'll follow. The second thing, before the war, during all my life, I identified myself, I had identified myself, I still identify myself to the culture of resistance. It concerns the Ukrainian state, by the way. All other things, you know, just I used to think about myself, kind of, okay, Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, and resistance movement. And third thing, maybe the most important thing, is intellectual curiosity. War is a serious challenge to all people, including those who study literature. I'm a Spanish scholar, I study Spanish literature, and I'm also doing a lot to study theory of literature, and it's a great challenge. What are the limits of literature during the war? And it can answer the question, what are the limits of literature in our contemporary society? Thank you.
John, thank you so much for wonderful work. Our guests, thank you for being here. So my coping strategy is finding your place during the war. I had a very striking moment on the first day of the invasion. So bombs started falling on our heads, and I was connected by multiple journalists. And the question they were asking, so what is the difference between Russians and Ukrainians? Guys, Ukrainians, what language you are speaking? And who you actually are? Can you briefly retell the history of Ukraine? And it was a unique moment when you realize how culture, history, and national identity are deeply connected to national security and your chances to survive. Because if people all around the world are not understanding what is in danger, why you are targeted, and you are also targeted not for the first day, and it's not first year of the war, and it's not the first century of the war, you realize that under this very physically hard circumstances, you also have to care to explain, and it's very awkward. You are under the threat. And from this position, you have to educate and to share your history and your identity. That was very striking, awkward moment, and the moment when I find my place in this war. And as this war keep happening for more than 9 years, the next coping strategy, as the tragedy is routine now, the resistance has to be your routine as well.
Well, I am not the right person to be asked this question right now, but I'll try to answer like with kind of optimism right now. So after the full-scale invasion began, for me and for my community of people, like basically people from Ukraine Pen Club, we were always visiting places being newly deoccupied or being really close to the front line. So you are discovering these places, you are discovering people, and especially at the occupied territories, especially in the Kiev region, it was like a huge inspiration. For example, when we were passing Makariv, the place where the huge fighting, well, like it was 1 week after the occupation. And passing Makariv, like totally empty village, we saw like tractor. And it was like, it was it was walking, like everything was mined around, but the exact field was the mine just because of like it had to be like something should grow there. And for me, like it was a big inspiration. It was a big inspiration to be in Kherson during the Christmas and meet people and like to hear the craziest stories. Yes, but of course, like it was like 600 meters from us, like buildings and people were hit by artillery, but we've been there, we've been with these people like struggling during the occupation and like being in the partisan movement, and it was just like incredible. But I haven't faced and really like the true emptiness of war like till the months ago when my best friend she's died, and now I realize that they're trying to touch us personally. And according to the polls, like 86% of Ukrainians have the personal lost in this war. And of course, it's really hard to keep the optimism and to continue your work like at all, to talk to people, to share your thoughts in public. But still, you are remembering that this is a job you have to do. You are not a soldier, so you have no other option. So you should continue. And it's not helping me like to feel better, but it helps me to do something.
And that's the right moment to, I think, mention this. Now you're acquainted with our speakers. We actually approached Victoria Amelina a couple of months ago to appear on this channel. An inspiring writer. I never had the privilege of meeting her, but you see from her videos, she's fierce, passionate. I mean, you perhaps wouldn't have wanted to get in the wrong side of an intellectual argument because she'd have definitely won, but also an inspiring writer. And many of you will know that she was killed in a missile strike while working for Truth Hounds. So she carried on being creative, but
May I correct you? Sorry,
yes.
She wasn't actually at the mission of Truth Hounds at that
yes.
moment. She was visiting Donetsk region, like following her friend Catalina Gomez, a journalist from Colombia, and she just decided, like spontaneously, to come to Donetsk region at that day. So yeah,
so
she wasn't in
her
the
capacity as a cultural figure, but she died in the missile strike. Ending what was an extraordinary, promising, career as a writer, a creative talent. In her memory, we're going to read out one of her poems. It's been expertly translated into English. We're going to read it out verse by verse in Ukrainian and English, so you get a sense of the power of her writing and a sense of the power of Ukrainian culture and how it's fighting back against Russian oppression. So Sofia, if you lead, then I'll read the English out.
I'll start in Ukrainian. This poetry it isn't named, but I'll start with the first line. У весняне синє поле вийде жінка в чорній сукні. Імена сестер кричати, наче птах в порожнє небо.
In a barren springtime field stands a woman dressed in black, crying her sisters' names like a bird in the empty sky. She'll cry them all out of herself.
Викричіть усіх себе, ту, що відлетіла швидко, ту, яка про смерть благала, ту, що не спинила смерть, ту, яка чекає досі, ту, яка усе ще вірить, ту, що 40 днів мовчить.
The one that flew away too soon, the one that had begged to die, the one that couldn't stop death, the one that has not stopped waiting, the one that has not stopped believing, the one that still grieves in silence.
Викричіть їх усіх у землю, наче біль засіє в полі. З болю та імен жіночих виростуть їй нові сестри, знов співатимуть життя. Ну а що вона, ворона?
She'll cry them all into the ground as though sowing the field with pain. And from pain and the names of women, her new sisters will grow from the earth and again will sing joyfully of life.
А вона навік в цім полі, бо лиш крик її тримає, всіх цих ластівок в повітрі.
But what about her, the crow? She will stay in this field forever because only this cry of hers holds all of these swallows in the air.
Чуєш, як вона гукає всіх по черзі імена?
Do you hear how she calls each one by her name?
Thank you.
Thank you. And let's jump into, I think, probably the most complex and difficult topics here, and this is the one of cultural appropriation. Now, each of you have experience in a different field, have different experience of different works, whether they sort of be pictorial, literary, and so on. And all of you are trying to reclaim Ukrainian heritage from the Russian narratives that have been blended. My own personal revelation in this period was understanding that Ilya Repin, who was pretty much one of my favorite artists, obviously was Ukrainian. I had literally no idea from having obviously seen him in various galleries around the world, and in Russia the labels didn't really help understand his background. And then when you spot that, you see all sorts of Ukrainian motifs, and it adds a whole layer of meaning. So there's one extraordinary picture of the convict returning from Siberia. I think it's called He Was Not Expected or something like that. And he comes into the house and the family and children there looking shocked, surprised, crying. It's an incredibly emotional scene. And on one level, you think this is a political prisoner returning to a Russian house. But then when you know there's a deeper level of narrative, you see a picture of Taras Shevchenko sort of tucked away on the wall, and there's all sorts of another layer of depth and meaning. So if I could ask you, how are each of you reclaiming Ukrainian culture from, let's say, the imperial period, the imperial Russian narratives?
Because I'm an art curator and often I communicate with my colleagues abroad, also art association, cultural association, sometimes museums or art galleries. Actually, this to claim it back, it's a really long process for huge institutions. It will not be very quick, as I see now, which was a disappointment for me at first, but well, we have this long processes and its bureaucracy also in one hand. As I know for now, especially in the biggest museums all around the world, special art historians, they formed groups and they are working on the art history to kind of explore more about appropriated by Russia artists, as Malevich, Sonia Delone, many of them. But it will take some time. Because I travel a lot and I visit many art spaces around the globe, I see more often that they change labels of some certain artists, but not everywhere. And I think that it depends about which country we are talking. The same as supporting with financial support, weapon, the same in culture. So for example, in the UK, in the United States, as in some European countries, I see that they are quickly trying to delabel artworks and talk about, to put back a Ukrainian, that they are Ukrainian or related to Ukraine. But some of the countries, they have a very long process to that, and they are waiting for the global kind of a community to approve. And because the influence, we need to understand also. So Russia put a lot of efforts to do cultural propaganda for many years, and unfortunately at that time, Ukraine did nothing almost, at least not good job to promote Ukrainian culture as independent. So that's our fault from our side also. So now we formed a lot of grassroots initiatives, as mine, for example, and we are trying to do that very quickly by communicating personally. But on the global level, like official level, ministries of culture, institutions like Board of Museums, art historians, it will take some time. So we are started these processes, we are talking out loud as we can, communicating, explaining again and again, and that's my personal pain, that each time you have to explain again those things that you think there should be understandable by default because, you know, like intelligent people in culture and so on. But still Russia did a lot of propaganda and they put some certain ideas in minds of intelligent actually people. And also they have their chairs in boards of museums, still huge museums, and you wouldn't expect them to be there, but they're there and they do their influence. So we need to fight that also, but it will take time.
I'm sorry, I will be using some elements of the professional idiom, you know, as a professor. So the first thing we should do, we should define what is going on. And in this case, I use the concept of epistemic injustice. Epistemic injustice is the way of presenting information of about one country in the culture of another country, that this information is distorted, lied, or something like that. That was Russia was practicing in many dimensions. And what we are doing now, we're working with so-called local knowledges about us, so, which is aimed against this epistemic injustice. And there are many strategies of implementing epistemic injustice in culture. And one of the most famous is silencing. Just actually silencing, many facts disappear, and other facts appear, and then they are emphasized, and that this narrative is constructed. And what actually we have to do is to deconstruct them, and that's what I'm doing in my everyday practice. And in my everyday practice, so I'm working less than I would like to do because it's not my professional area, but I think we should focus on it. It's rereading Russian culture, reinterpreting it, and showing its imperialist component. It's not a new idea. You can find a very famous book by Eva Thompson, for example, Imperial Knowledge, or other things that shows how imperialist culture works. And then we should focus more on working how the ideas of Russian world are connected with the Russian classical culture, and to what extent. And then another thing, maybe Masha knows more about it, but she's an expert in Ukrainian literature, but we also did it in our course, which I taught in the other things. Just it's rethinking Ukrainian literature. You see, we should change our vision of ourselves, not as victims, but as protagonists. We should look upon ourselves as protagonists of the world history, and we have to learn how to construct our cultural narratives so that those cultural narratives could be interesting and understandable in the countries outside Ukraine. It's a long story. I stop here because Masha wants to say something.
Thank you for great comments and insights. I will pop up with similar arguments, because appropriation is definitely part of bigger problem and bigger processes which Russia is doing. It's creating myth of great Russian culture and simultaneously destroying other cultures, and not only Ukrainian. We have to highlight and double stress this moment. And first, we definitely have to deconstruct, because a lot of people are immersed in exploring Russian culture because it's great. And what is great in appropriation, exploitation, exploiting of image of the victim, silencing crimes, and silencing multiple authentic voices. And I would love to solve now this mystery, sorry for tautology, but solve the mystery of mysterious Russian soul that is so popularized and created. So actually the mystery of Russian soul is that Russian soul doesn't care what's happening right now with other souls and who made this experience happen with them, and actually perceiving other souls primarily as bodies. So we have to leave all this greatness behind and face the reality, and realize that we have multiple cultures, vivid and very diverse, and we have to immerse ourselves there, because this greatness is not incorporating in our image of future, democratic, diverse, and full of respect and cooperation. And of course, I here want to promote solidarity between all Eastern European countries and indigenous cultures that are erased or diminished by the great imperial power. And while Ukrainian culture has its voice, I want this voice bring up and show the solidarity with other voices as well.
I will end it up with, being honest, actually Ukrainians were the one also to create a big Russian myth. Ukrainians were invited to the Russia Palace, and they were working on Russia history. They were working on Russia art, music, and so on. Of course, with literature is more complicated because it depends on language. So if you write in Ukrainian, you definitely are a Ukrainian writer. But if you're writing in Russian, maybe 90% you are you are a part of Russia culture. So of course we do have some names we are discussing about, like for example Bulgakov, who was born in Kiev, yes, but he was definitely Russian imperialist. For example, I will follow Maria's thoughts about, for example, Mr. and Margarita. So they were known as nationalities, as ethnics in this book. It was few Ukrainians, but they were really sarcastic. It was written about them in really sarcastic form. So, of course, on the other hand, there is Gogol. At the beginning, he was writing about Ukraine, and he was selling some funny stories about Ukrainian magic and life in Ukrainian village. Of course, it's really nice, a literary masterpiece. But when we are talking about his next works, of course, it's only about Russia and Russian Empire. So I also want to, because of I'm summarizing, Marta has mentioned that Ukrainian state has failed with promoting of Ukrainian culture, and I must tell that we are not failures, because to promote something, at least you have to know about this. Of course, I'm privileged. I was born in west part of Ukraine. 7 years after independence began. I am not speaking Russian. I can understand, I can say something, but I'm not speaking Russian. I was totally growing up in Ukrainian culture because of my parents in 90s. They were really proactive. They were reading, listening, watching, and so on. Yes, so I am privileged. But speaking about the other people born here in Ukraine, considering themselves as Ukrainians, but being uneducated just because a part of their life, they were living, and the most important thing, they were studying in actually Russia schools. So we have taken some time to learn about ourselves. I was writing some work about Ukrainian anti-colonial process in Ukrainian literature, and I must tell, in 30 years we made a huge progress. We have hundreds of Ukrainian bookshops where you can buy Ukrainian books, but I must tell that 10 years ago it was impossible. You could buy only Russian books here. We've got plenty translations of classic and modern literature from all over the world in Ukrainian language. We have our writers being translated and being known, but we have to take some time to do this. And 30 years, as for me, it's really short time to make such a progress. So, of course, the full-scale invasion it became a catalyst for Ukrainians learn about themselves more intensive, and for global community to learn about Ukraine more intensive. Of course, culture like is the easiest way to explain what is the country, what its history, and like who are these crazy people. But yeah, I must tell you that we were moving really fast, but of course, like these hundreds of years under the empire, and especially when we've created this mythology, and when we were part of this world. So now that's why we are resisting also in the culture field. That's why now we are asking for example, a cancel of Russian culture, not because of we are just angry and we wanna like them being like them to shut up. Yes, but we just realize how dangerous it is. And we are asking people like to stop for a minute and maybe like to reconsider the way we are reading this literature, we are listening to this music, like Eva Thompson was mentioned. And I highly recommend this book. And it's really pity that this book, like it was published in 2000. So this book, it wasn't read. Like I must tell that some of them some of the communities were like criticizing her about her positions. So we should reconsider a lot of stuff, I suppose.
I'm going to sneak a quick question in here for you, Sofia, and for Maria as well. And you mentioned Nikolai Gogol. He's obviously a Ukrainian writer, and his early stories were humorous and set in Ukraine. I mean, they're also very rich and funny and interesting. And then he chose to go and write in Russian in the imperial capital. But there's an aspect of his stories which, now I reread them, sort of stands out from Russian writers. Maybe only Chekhov kind of comes close because of the humor and the humanity. But Gogol has a lot of humanity, and in some ways his stories could be read as a critique of the imperial hierarchy and you know, the sort of insanity that breeds, and a lot of his stories about kind of insanity and pretty crazy stuff. Do you think that's his Ukrainianness, a sort of sense of humanity, is entering his works in the sort of satire and critique he does? Could those works have been written by a Russian or not?
I'll pass the mic to Maria, but I'll give a short answer. Like we were spoken about Gogol on our way to Kupiansk with Vachtan Kibuladze, the Ukrainian philosopher. And we decided that we need to close this discussion because of, like, we have no time to discuss Gogol right now. Like, maybe after our victory, we'll have some time, and after we have some rest, we'll like reconsider what we are thinking about Gogol. But right now, there is no time, like, for us to think about him.
Thank you so much. Actually, Gogol is Ukrainian writer who we learn in school as Ukrainian writer, so we see him in our cultural heritage as well. For foreign audience, there is short, sharp, and great book with biographical details, how Mykola Gogol was writing his name while traveling abroad. And it's also available in English as free PDF, Nikolai Gogol, aka Mykola Gogol, by George Lutsky. So you will find all of the argument and more detailed about that. I also want to add a bit what Sofia was mentioning. It's very important to highlight the danger of weaponizing culture by totalitarian states, because recently I was on a conference in New York, and the most discussed topic was sharp power. This term was popularized since 2018, I guess, and that means that totalitarian states, they weaponize means for cultural diplomacy in order if the aim of soft power is to steal your mind and steal your heart, like to fall you in love with great Russian culture, for example. And sharp power is weaponization of totalitarian states, the means of cultural diplomacy, in order to confuse you, to make you feel it's not so obvious, it's not so clear, so just diminish the obvious things like Ukrainian language, Nazism, and who started the war, who was bombing kids in Donbass. And also literature is used for that, so you can Google about that and how Russia is using that. And also I highly recommend the article by Olga Bertelsen about Russian front organizations in Western academia. It's another example how to weaponize all of that, so we definitely need a break to see how dangerous is that and how totalitarian states use a lot of stuff for... Yeah,
Sorry, sorry for interrupting. I was just like trying to whisper, but it was too loud. I do have like really nice example about this. Like for example, Zakhar Prilepin. Zakhar Prilepin, he was a Russian writer. He was visiting before Ukraine, like recently, before the war began. In 2000, he was a soldier, a Russian soldier during the Chechen war, and as like he was also like really close to military movements, But his PR line was like he's like really masculine guy, like flirting with the girls and like telling about other guys have to be cool as he is. And in 2014, he joined Russia troops in Donetsk and Luhansk region, and he was fighting and he was actually killing Ukrainians. And then, I suppose, like starting with 2018, he started to be the main guest of Russia collective stand at the biggest book fairs in the world. And he had like huge crowds everywhere. I firstly saw him in France. It was like too many French people like being obsessed with reading Prilepin and listening to him. So like it's really like it's example how Russia was using the culture, and they were paying bribes to be there and to have this person and so on. And yeah, that's how it's works.
I just want to add the drop of optimism in all of that. Representatives of Ukrainian cultures are outnumbered, and we always run out of resources. So if you want to join the resistance, I encourage you to read Ukrainian writers, learn Ukrainian language, and also follow Ukrainian scholars, and you will be part of the resistance. Thank you.
The next question is for everyone. And I think it's a complex one because I think we struggle with this in Britain as well. As you know, Britain is a complex place with a troubled history, especially troubled if you happen to be Irish, Welsh, or Scottish. Perhaps less troubled if you're English, because you don't have quite such understanding of the power of imperialism. It's conveniently forgotten in some ways. And there's a distinction which I think you feel. A lot of English have a natural suspicion of nationalism, cultural nationalism, especially if it's Welsh, Irish, and Scottish. There's almost like an allergic fear to it that, and all too easily people will label it as being right-wing or being this or overly aggressive and so on. But I wanted to ask the question, is there a big difference between cultural nationalism and colonial nationalism, and what does that mean in the context of Russia and Ukraine?
May I answer this question? I wrote a book about this. I don't think people have read it. It was written something like more than 15 years ago about Spanish nationalism, different kinds of nationalism. In my comment about nationalism is, you know what? People demonize this term. You have an excellent scholar, his name is Anthony Smith. He wrote a book, Nationalism in the 20th Century. He said nationalism as a phenomenon is prosaic. It changes. There are a lot of varieties of nationalisms. But the word nationalism, which is used in the Western academic discourse, which is extremely stupid in my mind, you know, this is nationalism is always right, aggressive, something like totalitarian and something like that. So there are many variants of nationalisms. Cultural, liberal, or, you know, communist nationalism in Vietnam, or whatever variants of nationalism. Please let us define what we deal with. Of course, if we speak seriously about Ukrainian nationalist discourse, you can find a lot of variants, but please take into account what percentage the right nationalism had or is having in Ukrainian national consciousness now. You see, the so-called nationalist parties in Ukraine never had more than 4%. They never entered in the parliament. But if we speak about nationalism as identifying ourselves to Ukraine, for example, I don't see anything bad in this, you see. And if we use all cultural methods, all powerful cultural industry, which we should use to promote the renewed vision of our Ukrainian national identity as European, open, inclusive, or other things. I can write you the recipe, I know how to do it. So I don't see anything bad in nationalism. See, Russian nationalism, it is nationalism in the meaning of which the Western academia uses. The academia people use. This is right, aggressive, fascist, claustrophobic, whatever. You see, we can look for synonyms. And as far as Ukraine is concerned, there's something different. You see, we just protect ourselves. We even have not defined ourselves in this struggle. We see, because we don't have time, but we have to do it. This is what we scholars have to do.
I think that's true that we rediscover ourselves with this war, especially our culture, differences between regions, and it's beautiful. And I agree with my colleague that about demonization and different aspects of this term. And but maybe if we talk about positive concept about this term in terms of culture and art. Yesterday I was recording a podcast about reactivity in art. And on the first months of the full-scale or second stage of the full-scale war, I've seen as an art curator a lot of this kind of a nationalistic but in good way art. Very straightforward, very screaming about the ideas to be Ukrainian, about Ukrainian culture, about the problems that we have, that we are fighting Russia, and so on and so on. Redefining ourselves and trying to put this message of being a Ukrainian using art and culture. So it was intense, those first months especially, because it was vital for us also, and also because it's a process of rediscovering and understanding ourselves as Ukrainians, as a nation in Ukraine. And also, I also privileged I was born in Lviv, in Ukrainian-speaking family, not in a cultural environment, kind of. I don't have anyone in my family who is like musician or poet or any. So I'm the first one, let's say like this, working in this field. But still, we were pretty distant in the west of Ukraine from other parts of Ukraine, so like a small bubble. And in every country, and the biggest country, the biggest bubbles, kind of cultural bubbles you have. And what good now about the situation and good nationalism, that we accept our diversity inside the country, and we rediscover ourselves and other Ukrainians. And I think it's beautiful. It's bad that it's going through this painful process, but that's the good side, to be nationalistic, to like understand that you're Ukrainian and who you are as a Ukrainian. That's from my side.
Colleagues, thank you for brilliant comments. I also will add that term defensive nationalism is quite on agenda, and I will explain what that means for me. Like, probably I can be called defensive nationalist, and what does it mean? In near future, I want to live in Ukraine and be safe living in Ukraine. I want work and speak Ukrainian language, not having the fear that I will be claimed a nationalist or will be perceived like an aggressive or radical person just because I speak in my own language. and just safety and feeling safe being yourself. That's what that means for me. And also I realize that not only we are actively doing our job, but also other people are reshaping multiple discourses in policies, in politics, in culture, in education, in order to make this world safer, and also for having other perspective on imperialisms, because not only Russian imperialism exists in this world, and we have to do active job not only on this field, but on multiple others. So let's be aware of how busy our future will be, but we have to do this work to have a safe future.
In January this year, I've been to Colombia. We started our project to present Ukrainian culture in different countries of. I'm not really fan of this term, but I still using it of global South countries. So I've been there, and I was like walking down the streets, and I've seen these women's. They've been like they had some kind of traditional clothes, but you know, this like China-made traditional clothes. They were wearing the basket of fruits on their heads, and they were encouraging me to make a photo with them. Why I am mentioning this story? Because of, as for me, there are two types of nationalism, or like identifying yourself with some nation. For example, we were allowed to be kind of colonial nationalists because of Russia was encouraging the image of Ukrainians being a little dumb, being a little drunk, and like dancing hopak, and singing some Ukrainians like really, really pretty and really melodic Ukrainian songs like to entertain Russians actually, or other like people. Yeah, so we were allowed to be like this, and we were allowed to somehow to walk in culture, but like not developing our culture. Yeah, but just staying at this level, like in this plastic skirts and shirts, and singing some like drunken songs. But there is other, and this culture was allowed during the Soviet Union, for example. We are remembering Horov Viryovka and other theaters, I don't know, like museums, like being like totally open, being free, and people has received some prizes for their work and so on. But there is other type of nationalism. Russia not allowing us. It's anti-colonial nationalism actually. It's our willing to develop our culture on the one hand, like to work for the future, but on the other hand, to back to roots and to realize who we are, who are our like colleagues, and with what material we are working. So, of course, like all of us now, we are like kind of this anti-imperial, anti-colonial nationalists, and of course, we are triggering. On the one hand, we are triggering Russia because of they are supposed our territories being theirs. They are supposed us being Russians, but speaking like funny language, being a little bit dumb and drunk. Yes, of course, we are like triggering them. But on the other hand, we are still remembering about heritage after the Second World War, and of course, the world nationalist, and nationalism is a trigger word for other part of the world because of trauma. So that's why Russia propaganda was using this nationalist narrative like for decades, just like to proving that we are like dumb, drunken people in one moment decided that we like can kill other people, and Russia started to protect us. So this like difference between colonial nationalism and anti-colonial nationalism, I suppose it's really important for us to, yeah.
Very quick remark. It's just I want us and all people who speak about it to define terms. Because I have read some texts, you see, some books, saying that the true Russian nationalists are in the Ukrainian army now fighting against Putin. It's not my conclusion.
Kind of perverse idea.
It's easy. You see, they hate him. They think that Russia must become a great country without, for example, doing what they are doing to us now. And, you know, maybe they hate some other people as other nationalists, but this is the same thing. They hate Putin and they are in the Ukrainian army. I have not invented this fact.
That's odd. Sofia?
I'd like to remark, but it was like a Red Army defending Tsar and being also anti-imperialist.
This smells like Russian BS to me. So we've only got a few minutes left of this panel, so I'm going to lump in the two questions I wanted to ask the panel. So I'm going to fire two questions out, and if you can, you know, let's have some nice sort of punchy answers to these. The first one is, you know, I know next to nothing about Ukrainian literature, and I'm on a journey of discovery, but one great writer, of course, is Lesia Ukrainka, and the question is, should we be listening to Ukrainian Cassandras more? Because in the 90s, Poland, the Baltics were telling us, you have to be careful with Russia. You have to believe us not to trust what they say, because nothing they say is truthful, and Russian imperialism hasn't gone away. We didn't believe it. We didn't listen to them. We thought they were crazy and aggressive. Now we listen to the Poles. Now we listen to people in the Baltics. But Ukrainians are being labeled. Well, you can't really believe what Ukrainians are saying. They're emotional. Of course they're going to be biased. They're too close to events. My personal experience is Ukrainians are the most rational, realistic assessors of the situation. So that's the first question. Should we be listening to Ukrainian Cassandras? The second question is a difficult one, but there's been a lot of loss of cultural heritage, loss of talent and people, and I just wanted each of you to mention which for you has been the most painful loss of the war in the cultural sphere, and just sort of mention it, you know, just get it out there so people realize the scale of the losses that Russia's inflicted. So these are the two questions. I want to lump them in together, and we'll go through right to left.
I will answer quickly because I know that we don't have much time. I have faced this problem often when I communicate outside the country, that I need to be very straightforward, but still reserved with my how I speak and what I speak, because yes, that's the approach that she's from Ukraine, she lives in Ukraine, she stays, so she's under stress, PTSD, and so on and so on. So in order for my colleagues to see me normal, kind of, I need to be very cautious with my thoughts and how I speak, what I speak, and actually what I speak and how I speak depends from the country I go. That sounds crazy, but still, because the narratives and so on and so on. So I have to consider even this. Please listen to Ukrainians for sure, because yeah, maybe we have PTSD and so on, but still we have the information from the first hands and a lot of experience we are willing to share and so on in our stories. The second question?
Cultural loss.
Cultural losses. I will not tell you exact names and so on, but there are two aspects for me really painful. First, that many from my circle of people, many they voluntarily went to the army from the first day, and they are great painters, musicians, and so on and so on. Some of them are dead. We lost them forever. And another people, they left Ukraine. They evacuated. Some of them, a lot of them, they don't have where to come back because their buildings, like cities, were destroyed. So we have two categories of people really serving the army, dying each day, and they are bright cultural representatives, and those who are abroad and maybe never will come back, and it's really painful. And the result of this war, as long as it will take, we will lose more and more of them. And we are talking inside our cultural community, professionals, about this problem. For example, when we win the war, how can we encourage people to come back, and especially those great professionals, cultural representatives? So yeah.
I will do my best to be brief. Answering the first question, yes. But we have to take into account that Cassandra's texts are not easy to understand. It's prophetic, epiphany, it has many layers. And some layers are, positive, some of them we don't know, because, you see, the text it's not easy. We should focus on it, this is our professionals. And the second question is, I will speak about my personal experience. The greatest loss is the philological school, which I had created in the city of Mykolaiv. As a result of the war, as school, it is dead. It is not dead in terms that people who belong to the school, they are alive and they are working. I'm still working with them, but it's a very bad experience, by the way.
Yeah, and I can confirm how great international conferences in Mykolaiv were when you were organizing that in that school. It was pure inspiration to be here in Mykolaiv a few years ago. So I would like to highlight that we were, as a nation, as Ukrainians, we were acknowledged as a physical power, as a civil society, but we have not been discovered as an intellectual power to the global community. And there is a few reasons for that. It's determination and just killing Ukrainians' intelligentsia for multiple centuries, shadowing our voices. And also there is global tendency that area studies in international relations, in general, in all other countries, are supposed to be less valuable in just case studies, and just theory is more important than actual on-the-ground experience. So it's more global theoretical problem, and Katarina Zarembo is the best person to explain all the details. I, Roman Horbik, and Katarina Zarembo, we are editing now a special issue. It's called Empathy versus Empire, How Not Understanding of Imperialism Shapes Decision, Discourses and Policies in and about Ukraine and Europe and beyond. There's 99% of Ukrainian scholars all around the world in Ukraine with their case studies and area studies, and also this discussion why we cannot say that on-the-ground experience is not valuable as just these very beautiful, sophisticated theories. So we are in process to discover a lot about ourselves, and world will do that as well. And the most painful loss for me was Victoria Amelina, because huge inspiration. She's so powerful, so active, and that was resistance in action. And who will now do her job? No one will do. It's a loss that cannot be substituted, or it's an emptiness. And probably we have to keep this emptiness and communicate about that, because human losses, it's the biggest losses we are having right now, and we keep having that. And even now having this discussion about cultural resistance possible only because physical resistance now is good, so someone is dying to allow me to talk about my culture and future of my culture. So to end this up, I will just ask you to use your voice to ask for high-range missiles and fighter jets for Ukraine. Thank you so much.
When I'm remembering the first days of full-scale invasion, when the world leaders were waiting for Kiev fall, my answer will be really short. You can't listen to Cassandra while watching her struggling. And speaking about the last question, I don't know, The only thing I now care, like not only thing, but one of the most important thing for me to care about, it's children, and especially children kidnapped and children studying in Russian schools, like for 1.5 years, for 9 years. We have to fight for their brains. We should create the system to integrate them back because of they are our children. And of course they can choose any identity they want, but they have to have a right to choose. And of course, this young people, I really hope, I'm not pretty sure all of us will stay alive till the end of the war, and I'm pretty sure that after we are going to live shorter lives than all other people in the world, especially in the First World War, First World, because of stress and struggling we went through. But these young people, they have to save our culture, and they have to bring it to the future.
Let me finish with one remark about Victoria Amelina. You know that she was with two Colombian intellectuals. The other one is Héctor Abad Faciolince. He is the most famous Colombian writer. Quite by chance, I was involved in preparing his book translated into the Ukrainian language. El olvido que seremos, the oblivion we will be. And the main message of this book, so I was asking myself, what is the message for us, for Ukrainians? You see, the book about hatred, about pain, about how his father was killed, you see, in 1987. And then this terrible coincidence. You know, this war is not about us only. It's a global message to the world. You see, because I was supposed to be a moderator at the meeting of Héctor Abad Faciolince in Kiev, and then they decided to change, to invite someone else, and so on. That's just to see we're close. We're so far, where Colombia is, where we are now. Yeah, but you see, we're como se dice en español, el mundo es un pañuelo, yeah, es un kerchief. You see, that's the main message from our panel today to people.
Yes, the guys left Victoria, but the only person was with her before me and her husband arrived to the hospital in Dnipro was Catalina Gomez. I already mentioned her. She is a Colombian journalist and working here for France 24, and we are really grateful to Catalina being with Victoria all the way.
Thank you for that incredibly moving and impactful session. Thank you to Marta, Oleksandr, Maria, and Sofia.